Hi everyone, and welcome to Sam's Storytelling Across Media, and this is our Storytelling for Kids panel. And I'm Laura Jones, Operations and Programming Coordinator for Comic-Con, and I have some amazing guests here to tell you about their comics. Does everyone want to introduce themselves? Sarah, do you want to start?
Oh, sure. Hi, I'm Sarah Kuhn. I write various books and comic books for the purposes of this panel. Probably the most important are Shadow of the Batgirl, which is my Cassandra Cain book with the wonderful artist Nicole Goop, and the Riverdale Diaries, Hello Betty, which is basically the Riverdale kids in middle school, and that's with the wonderful artist J-Bone.
Stephanie?
Hi, I am Stephanie Cooke. I have two books coming out next year. The first is in January. It's called Oh My Gods. I should have brought a little prop like Sarah did. And I have a second book out in July of next year called Paranorthern.
Meggie?
Hi, I'm Meggie Ramm. That is my actual name. I am like Stephanie. I have a book that is coming out soon that I don't have. It's called Batcat, but if I had it, I'd put it here.
Looks beautiful.
Yeah, isn't it gorgeous? It took me such a long time. I love the cover. And then I also have a comic out called Teaching Kids Comics, because my main job is teaching comics to kids, which I would also have, but I left it in another room.
So everyone look it up online. Victoria?
Hi, my name is Victoria Ying. I am an illustrator and author. My most recent books are Diana, Princess of the Amazons with DC Comics, which is the tale of a young Wonder Woman, written by Shannon and Dean Hale. And my latest book, City of Secrets, came out in July. It is a story about two middle grade kids running around in a steampunk town trying to dodge some assassins. My next book is City of Secrets, the sequel, and that's coming out in July of 2021.
I can't wait. My kids are already like, when is it? Where's the next one? Not yet.
I'm like on the last 2 pages right now.
Oh, that's gotta feel so good.
And Lilah?
I'm Lilah Sturges. I don't have my books with me, although my Zoom background is the cover for Lumberjanes, The Infernal Compass, which is one of the all-ages graphic novels that I've written. I've done a series of 3 Lumberjanes OGNs, and the third one is currently out in comic book stores and comes out in the book market tomorrow, which means nothing because this is not live, so October 20th. And I also have a book called Girl Haven that is a middle reader book coming out in February.
Awesome. All of your books are so great, and I'm so excited to have you here. What drew you to writing comics for kids? Is that what you always wanted to do, or?
Who are we talking to?
Anyone who wants to answer? I know it's so hard when I can't make direct eye contact.
I'll go. So in my 8th grade yearbook, I have a quote in it that says, I want to move to Japan when I grow up and be a mangaka, because that was the only way I really saw myself doing comics. Was like I wanted to write and draw them. And at the time, like when you saw like Cape Comics in stores, like those jobs were kind of separate. So I knew I wanted to write and draw. And so like my parents were shocked that they're like, you want to do what? And you know, eventually my career took a different path, but still I love that I get to come back and come full circle to this like childhood dream.
That's awesome. Anyone else?
I'll go.
I can go.
This is the other problem with Zoom panels, because that nobody talks and then everybody talks and then people are polite. Anyway, you know, I grew up reading comics, as I'm sure a lot of people here did. I loved Betty and Veronica and X-Men and like all the superheroes. And I actually, when I was like 12, I wrote a very strongly worded letter to Archie Comics because I was upset about some sexism in a storyline. And they actually wrote me back. So somewhere I still have a letter on Archie Comics letterhead responding to my like angry 12-year-old query. So it's kind of fun now that I'm writing actual Archie Comics. But, you know, I think that least for me, I never really thought of it as like, I want to write comics for kids. I just wanted to write comics. And I assumed I would have to wait, a very long time to do that because I had mostly been working on my prose career. So it was just like someone basically asked me if I wanted to pitch something, and it was for adult comics. It wasn't for kids. It was Fresh Romance, which were romance comics. And it kind of went from there. And then I guess my first thing for a younger audience was actually I wrote a couple of Barbie comics. And that was actually off of Fresh Romance. The editor read Fresh Romance and liked it, and then wrote to me and said, "Hey, do you want to write some Barbie comics?" And I was like, "Sure, that sounds like fun." So that's kind of how I got into that, and then have been slowly learning like what is sort of good for different age categories and things like that.
I came to kids comics sort of indirectly. I was very interested in Lumberjanes because it was a queer comic, and when I got asked to write it, I was excited because I knew I was going to be writing a comic that was very queer focused and queer friendly and girl friendly. And so that was kind of my like, oh, this is great. And then I was like, wait, how do you write for kids though? Because I've only ever written adult books. And I feel like it came very naturally to me, and it didn't take long to sort of like lock in that sort of all ages vibe. And I think it helps that I'm kind of a silly person just in general, and so my sense of humor matches that. And I am very sort of emotional, heart on my sleeve kind of a person, and I found that writing for this age range just feels so good because you can be really open and honest about feelings, and you can be silly, and I love it. And ever since I started writing Lumberjanes, I've just wanted to do more and more.
Yeah, I guess like for me, I didn't explicitly set out to write kids comics. So both Paranorthern and Oh My Gods were kind of pitched for an older audience, for a teen audience. And our editors felt that they would work a lot better as middle grade things. But like Lilah, like I'm pretty silly, and I guess, I mean, I'm wearing like a sequined dinosaur shirt, so like I think that's a moot point, but like I just really like bad jokes and just, having fun. So writing for middle grade, I was a little intimidated at first, but then it just turned into such a wonderful experience, like instead of like your editor kind of being like, ooh, you know what, like I don't know if these puns really work for like a teen adult audience sort of thing. They're like, more puns, put it all in. Like it's really just been fun and a rewarding experience so far. I really just like being able to have fun and kind of, tell jokes and have a side of nice serious things going on too. But, hopefully while kids enjoy reading about other things.
Yeah, I got into creating comics for kids because I hang out with kids about 80% of the time, and I buy a bunch of kids comics to share with them. And I also used to work at a comic book shop where I was in charge of buying kids comics, and it's exactly what everybody's been saying. You get a little bit more of you get more breadth to be silly and ridiculous. You can have like a talking, singing bard bear, and kids are just like, yeah, those exist, that's fine. Well, with like a more adult comics, you kind of I feel like there's like almost a pressure that you've got to like make it like sordid and complicated with like feelings. And you can have some of that in kids comics, but you can also have like a singing, dancing bard bear, and it's way more fun to write singing, dancing bard bears, I think.
And I think too, that's kind of a point that everyone mentioned, is just because it's aimed at kids doesn't mean adults don't love them too. Like, I've read, so many kids books, and not just to kids, but because they're enjoyable. And do you find that you write comics that you wish you had as a kid? So I find when I read the kids comics, it's because I wish I had read that when I was younger.
Absolutely. Like so much so, like a few years ago, well, more than a few years ago now, probably almost a decade ago now, but I used to do like comic book podcasts and like reviews and stuff. And I didn't feel like there was like a ton of stuff out there for kids even then, like there was some things, but we've really seen a huge surge in kids comics. Like middle grade is, a really hot thing right now for especially book publishers. But, when we were doing this podcast, I just felt like there wasn't enough stuff geared towards that audience. Like I wanted to see more of that. I wanted to see more all ages things and more things that would usher in like new audiences to the comics industry. And it's just wonderful to kind of see that people are actually hopping on this bandwagon now and just, because I would have loved like so many of these things. Like Lumberjanes as a kid, I would have like died for, and
I would have gone
like,
nuts for it.
right? There's just so many things right now that I think, are fantastic.
I have a really good friend named Jackie Ball, who is also a comic book writer who writes kids comics. I wish you were here. And the way we became friends is we were on a panel with each other at San Diego Comic-Con, and someone asked a very similar question to this one. And so I said, well, one of the reasons that I love Lumberjanes so much is that when I was 9, 10, 11 years old, if I had seen a comic that had a trans girl character in it who was treated so lovingly and kindly and honestly, it would have changed my life. It would have changed the whole course of my existence. And as I started talking, I see people in the audience are starting to, like, their eyes are getting a little misty. And then I just start bawling right there on the stage. And I can't speak. And Jackie looks at me and she goes, "Do you need a hug?" And I said, "Yes." And we just hugged on the panel. And then finally I was able to speak and continue the panel, but we've been good friends ever since. And that is, to me, something that is so powerful is that you can explore so much about identity and in kids comics in a very open and honest way now, things that you couldn't have done in the past, but that have the potential to be so powerful. And that's what my book Girl Haven is about. It features a transgender girl protagonist, and that is exactly the book that I wish had existed when I was in middle school. So that was my stated goal in writing it, was to create exactly that book.
That makes me so happy. That's such a lovely story. Is anybody else writing for what they wanted to see as a kid?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
You go first, Sarah.
Now it's like, you go. No, you go.
Yeah. Up first. No, you.
I feel like we all need a beautiful cry break after that story. That was really lovely. But I mean, I resonate very much with what Lilah was saying. I think that even just seeing yourself as a protagonist in a story, in a comic book, and then of course comics have that extra great visual element that prose doesn't always have, where you can actually see it with your eyeballs. So I think that has always been a big thing for me as far as women of color and Asian American women and Asian American girls. And one of the reasons that I was so excited to pitch DC for their YA line was they said, yes, you can pitch Cassandra Cain. You don't have to pitch, Barbara Gordon Batgirl, even though that's the Batgirl that, a lot of people know, obviously. And that was so exciting to me, because I think that, similarly, if I had a story like that when I was a kid, where it was a comic book and it was like a thick graphic novel, and there was an Asian American girl on the cover who was a superhero and was the main character, that would have been absolutely amazing. And I also really love what Lilah said about sort of seeing these characters that represent us being treated so lovingly. That was very important to me in Shadow of the Batgirl, because Cassandra has a very hard childhood. She's been raised by a supervillain and trained to be a weapon and basically nothing else. And so when she starts making new friends outside of that, it was important for me to show that, like, this person could be loved unconditionally, and she could be loved by a variety of people unconditionally. And there is a line that we gave to Jackie, who's the sort of Asian auntie character who takes Cassandra under her wing, where at one point she tells her, you know, it's okay to not be okay. Like, basically, you do not have to be strong all the time. You do not have to be kind of impervious all the time. You can be yourself. You can be vulnerable. You can be soft, and we will take care of you. We will still love you. Like, that will not change anything. So I think, like, being able to see those characters not only centered, but also treated so lovingly and with such compassion is very important, and definitely would have made a big difference to me as a kid.
Yeah, kind of jumping off what has already been said, I think it's been nice nowadays writing comics because A, more representation is happening in the industry, and B, I think you're able to dive in even into kids' books, into creating more like diverse storylines. I feel like a lot of the books that I read as a kid were like very neatly wrapped like morals, like, you know, don't talk to strangers on the internet. That didn't turn out so well. And like other kinds of things like that. But it's nice now because like with Lumberjanes and with Shadow of a Batgirl, you've got these stories that take on really big issues. And it's not so much like a lighthearted, like Aesop's Fables kind of thing. And I think that that's something that I'm really grateful is happening in kids comics, that you can tackle like things like with Amulet, with like losing a loved one, or like having a harsh childhood. And the one that I'm working on, or the comic that I'm working on right now, Batcat, has a non-binary character. And that's like awesome, because as a non-binary person, that would have been really cool to have as a kid. So it's nice to be able to write comics for your younger self. I feel like there's something that's a little bit healing in that as well.
And I think too, like in City of Secrets, it's, you know, obviously for kids, but it's sort of, there's so many layers to it. And so I think in a kid's comic, there's like sort of one layer. I mean, I don't know if, I'm sure you did that, you know, but you can speak to it, but you know, there's a layer for kids, and then another layer, and then even another layer on top.
Yeah, I feel like City of Secrets for me, it is definitely written for me as a child, because I was a really dark goth kid, you know, like I just like dark shit. Oh, sorry. I don't know if we can cut that, but I just like dark stuff, you know, like I thought that it was really cool when characters were in real danger. And, you know, cartoons were great, but I really liked anime because it really showed me like a different level of maturity that wasn't for adults either. So City of Secrets to me was really all of my interests just like stacked on top of each other. So it was about like me being a kid, because I was very strong with my editor that I was like, I don't want to age these kids up. I want them to be middle grade aged, and I want them to face this type of danger. And also like all these other aspects that I just love from complicated books. So it's like all parts of me all together. It's me as a kid, it's also me as a teen, and it's me as an adult as well.
So what do you think makes the story connect with kids? We talked a lot about seeing ourselves in the books, but do you think there's something that you try to put in all your stories that really gets, if is it puns, Stephanie? Is something else that really, you know?
I do love a good pun. And that's just personal though. I mean, like, I have a fantastic editor who like kept my pun in my title. Paranorthern is about a bunch of chaos bunnies that invade the world, and they're trying to get them to go back to their world. So my editor put in the official title, Paranorthern and the Chaos Bunny Ahopcalypse, which I'm very pleased with. But yeah, I mean, I guess I just sort of got sidetracked with the idea of puns. I didn't formulate any other kind of actually an answer to this, but yeah, I don't know. Okay, what was the question again? I'm so sorry.
And then for anyone, do you think there's something you include in your stories that you know will always like grab the kid?
Right. No, for me, like I think I just kind of write the story that I want to write. For me, I get really attached to characters, so I try and make those characters as fleshed out as possible, and just kind of, you know, give them, even if it's just in my own head, like, you know, a backstory and like family and quirks and likes and dislikes. And even if those don't make it into the book, like I really like trying to make those characters as real to me as possible so that when I write them, hopefully they resonate with readers. So I don't know, like, I don't know if there's anything I particularly plan to kind of put in my books each time. It's just, I want them to be really character driven, and I want kids to like, or not even like, if they don't like someone, that's fine too. Like, I just want them to feel something for the characters, and that's kind of my main focus usually when I'm tackling something.
Anybody else feel like they have to, there's something they'd like
I'll
to
go. Like City of Secrets, to me, the big story is really about friendship, and it's about forming friendship. And, you know, it's not always easy. And I love stories where, oh yeah, this is the best friend character. But I'm always like, as a kid too, I was like, how do I make friends? And so like, that's obviously a goth weirdo. So it was one of the things that I was always really interested in as a kid. But also like, I find those dynamics now to be so interesting, to be like, okay, well, how do you form these friendships? What makes the basis of a good friendship? And that's like the thing that I always try to focus on is, if they're already friends at the beginning, I want to like make it sound absolutely clear why they're friends and like what makes them a good pair. Or like in City of Secrets, where I was talking about establishing a friendship.
Yes, I think like I really like what Victoria said about sort of like remembering, you know, what were maybe the things that were your main concerns when you were a kid. Like, I think that's something that I try to put myself in the headspace of the younger version of me, because some of my concerns are still the same, but not all of them. So, you know, I'm still trying to find the perfect like pink high top. Like, that's maybe a concern that's the same, but other things not so much. So I remember like when I was writing my YA debut, which was a prose book called I Love You So Mochi, speaking of puns, it was about a Japanese American girl who goes to Japan for the first time. And I was like thinking about like, okay, what would it be like if I went to Japan now? Like, what would that experience be like? What would I be interested in? What would I be sort of obsessed with? And then I ended up having a dinner with two of my friends' kids who went to Japan for the first time. They're Japanese American. They went to Japan for the first time as actual teenagers. So I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. Like, tell me what were sort of like your observations, or, you know, the things that you were interested in. And the things that they kept pointing out were usually things that were potentially embarrassing. So there was like this monument they went to, this big temple that has a big wooden pole in the middle with a hole in it called Buddha's nostril. And you can crawl through the nostril. That's part of sort of the whole attraction. And it gives you like, you know, good luck in the next life. And so they were talking about that. And, you know, they were not really interested in like how beautiful this temple is, like all of the amazing, you know, art and all the architecture and everything. They were like, oh my God, we saw some people trying to go through that hole, and we were so worried they were going to get stuck. And then we started talking about what would happen if we got stuck. Would they have to come and like dismantle Buddha's nostril? Like, would it cause like an international incident? Would it end up on social media? And I was like, right, if I went to that beautiful temple when I was a teenager, I would probably not be paying attention to like the architecture and everything. I would be obsessed with this potential source of embarrassment. So I think that for me, I always try to like put myself in the mindset of like my younger self, so I can remember what were actually the things that you were passionate about or concerned about or obsessed with. And then I try to go from there, since it can be a little bit different than what, you know, I might be worried about now.
I think that's so important, is to understand that kids are just as smart as adults. It's just that their points of reference and their concerns are different. And so that's why, you know, when we do Lumberjanes is a very sort of communal activity, and like the editors and the artists, and we all kind of talk to each other about like, who is this character and how does she feel and what's going on in her head. And the conversations we have are pretty substantive and have a lot of nuance. It's just that, you know, when you're say 10, 11 years old, what is happening in your friend group is so incredibly important to you that that's where the majority of your focus is going. And these are the things that you're trying to figure, the problems that you're trying to solve. And so I think that, yeah, what I find kids respond best to is the parts of the story that actually address their concerns in ways they can understand. Because they can understand a lot. They just need the appropriate touchstones. And, you know, I'm always out there rooting for the weird smart kids because I was the weird smart kid. And if I can write books for the weird smart kids, then I feel like I've done something useful with my life.
Yeah, I'm writing books for the weird morbid kid who also didn't have a lot of friends, surprisingly. But I think it's kids have to deal with such big topics nowadays, especially with like access to the internet and with quarantine. They're faced with a lot of big issues. So I feel like there's not a lot of like content that is really, you know, to really shy from in terms of kids because they're facing so much of it. But it's like what Lilah said. I had a group of girl students who shared a table in one of my classes, and then one day, like, one of the girl students came to me in tears because they're like, they don't want to sit with me anymore, and that's like the end of the world. And like, as an adult, you're just like, well, just go. It's just like, go sit at another table because they're jerks. But when you're a kid, like, those relationships are like make or break to you. Like, you can be worried about like an earthquake in California just as much as you're worried about like getting kicked out of your friend group for a day. So like making like having your storylines be able to access both of those like kind of fears, I think is important, because both of those are things that kids worry about on a daily basis, and that sucks.
Yes, and taking those things seriously, not minimizing them
the
way that adults tend to do.
Yeah, because you can't just tell a kid, well, just go sit at another table, because that's like their whole world has been shattered for the day. And I guarantee you, when they go home and they talk to their parents are going to be like, so like, how was math class? Like, did you learn anything new? And that's going to pale in comparison to being kicked out of the friend group table.
Does anybody have any really good stories about a kid that connected with one of their books? I know one of my favorite things about working at Comic-Con is when someone, you know, comes up to me and says like how much Comic-Con means to them, and I'm sure as creators that must happen to you.
I mean, I wish I had stories like that, but my book came out in January, and so like the first con was going to be Emerald City, and that just didn't happen. And then my other book came out in July, so like I'm dying to actually like interact with some of my like actual readers. You know, like this year has been tough, especially to debut, so I'm hoping to have that experience sometime soon, but I'm still glad to know that like people are reading the book and it's getting out there.
I'll take a video of my 4-year-old talking about it.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
Literally, it came, I pre-ordered it, and it came, and it's pretty long.
Yeah, it's a big book.
And we had to read the whole thing. Like, I was not allowed to stop reading it, and I was like, you know, my throat's gonna. So I mean, you'll definitely have those stories, because like, you know, I have one in my house. Like, she did not want to we were not allowed to stop reading it, and it was like getting later and later.
Oh,
I have a story. I have a story, and Victoria, this would definitely have happened with your book had I had it at the time. But the way that my class ends is all of my students get 15 minutes to read a comic from this like huge like basket of comics that I bring with me. And I teach K through 5, which is an interesting range. And the last 15 minutes, like before like the rest of class, everybody's just like rabid. Everybody wants to talk. You know, kids are kids. They just like want to tell you about what happened with their cat that day. But then at the end of class, when it's 15-minute reading break time, first of all of the kids swarm the table with the books. And then it is dead silent. It's like my favorite part of class, not just because it gives me like a break, but because it's also this period of time when these kids, and I feel like it's kind of rare nowadays, but like they're so books, they all have the book, and they're all just completely in that world that you guys have created. And I've had them do it with my comic, which is like cool, whatever, but it's like really cool to see it happen with like a bunch of your friends' comics, and just see them like get so like deep in there, and then like when it's cleanup time, I have to like go around and be like, you guys aren't listening, like you need to get out of the world for a second because your parents are going to be here and they're going to yell at me. So that's my favorite thing is reading time with my students, because they just get so excited and also so quiet.
Oh, you are like the best teacher ever. I wish that I had a teacher at that age who would have been like, spend the last 15 minutes of class reading comics. That would have been like the best.
Well, it's great. It's also good like research. And I think that comics have like, there's a lot of really good representation in comics right now. So I want to give my students like comics that actually show like people that they could be. So
yeah,
yes.
That's extremely, extremely cool. For me, like along the lines of what Victoria was saying, you know, our Batgirl book came out in February. So we were also looking forward to, I remember Nicole, the artist, and I were talking at last year's Comic-Con about how like, oh, maybe next year there will be like little Cassandras like dressed in the costume you designed, because the way Nicole designed the Batgirl costume that Cassandra sort of DIYs for herself at first was very like much intentional, that you could just make it from stuff at home. Like you could, you know, rip up something for the mask and like draw the symbol on a little sweatshirt. And like, so we were like, oh, maybe we'll see some little Cassandras, and we still hope that will happen someday. But in the meantime, one thing that just always reduces me to like bawling tears is to get like, a lot of parents have sent me photos of like little Asian American girls reading Shadow of the Batgirl. And, you know, like it is a YA book. It is a little more, I don't know, some mature themes and stuff. So sometimes when they're really little, I'm like, are they old enough to read that? But I think they're just enjoying, you know, the Nicole's beautiful visuals and everything. And so it just makes my heart very warm. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about, you know, writing books for your younger self, who is now represented as this very adorable younger person. And I've had a few of my friends send me pictures of like their daughters. Like one of my friends has a little 3-year-old Asian American, and she sent me a picture of her like in her Elsa costume, like Elsa from Frozen. And she's just like engrossed. And I know she can't read it all yet. Like she doesn't actually know what, you know, what some of the squiggles on the page say, but she's just so into like this story in pictures of this girl who looks like her, who's going around doing these like super heroic things. And I think, you know, that also speaks to the beauty of comics, that you don't need to, you know, I feel like my job is like the less important one. Like I write the words, but you don't actually a lot of times need the words. So I think it's really beautiful, like for them to, like for a really young kid to still be able to get something out of that story, even if they can't read all the dialogue yet.
The one story that comes to mind for me is I was doing a book tour when Lumberjanes the Infernal Compass came out, and I don't remember what city it was in, but a kid came up to me at the bookstore signing, and we were talking, and this is a very, very serious like 7-year-old, you know, clearly someone who was she was like reading way above her grade level, and she had a lot of thoughts. And I said, well, who's your favorite character in Lumberjanes? She said, Ripley. I like Ripley because she's really silly. I said, oh, that's great. And she said, and one thing I really liked about your book was that Ripley had to pee, because a lot of times in books people don't have to pee, and I don't think that's very realistic.
Just a point.
She's right. It's going back to that sort of putting your mind in, like, what are the concerns of actual children? And definitely that would be one of them.
That's hilarious.
So obviously so many kids like the books. What advice would you give someone to encourage their kids to read? Like if kids to read, is it, you know, do you have any advice for teachers or parents or kids who are looking to kind of get into reading comics?
As a teacher, comics are a really good way to get your kids starting to read. And like Sarah was saying, that there's some younger kids who are looking at a comic who don't know exactly what's happening in it yet. it doesn't, it's still good to give your kid that because they're able to do correlations between like the pictures and the words, and it'll help them expand their vocabulary. So you should just get your kids to read comics because it'll make them nice and smart. But the other thing is, if you want to get your kid to start reading, I think reading with your kid is really important. My dad read Lord of the Rings with me, and my mom read Harry Potter. And that was like a very formative part of like my childhood. And then also getting your kid comics that they would like to read. I had a lot of dads come into the comic book shop and they got like Silver Age, like Daredevil stuff for their daughters. And it's really cool, like if you've got a comic that is like really important to, you know, your identity and your branding, but like also there's so many good comics for younger kids now that maybe you could expose them to instead. So yeah, I'd say just like reading with your kid and also picking something that they'd like.
That's super important. I remember when my own kids were little, I'm super old. When my own kids were little, I read to them a series of books about a boy wizard by some author whose name I can't recall. And they enjoyed it when we did the story time together. But the books that they picked up on their own, especially before they were very literate, were the comic books that we had lying around, because they could follow the story through the pictures and make exactly those connections you were talking about, Maggie. They could sort of intuit what was happening. Even if they didn't get all the words, they could get enough of the words to sort of like make it through. And they love the pictures. So I think it's great to have both of those experiences.
And I think too, you know, like it's fun to just read and explore worlds that people create for you. But like comics also have, you know, there's like the science comics series, and even like Raina Telgemeier's books explore like really complex things. Like Guts is like all about anxiety and just processing, you know, what those feelings are. And like a kid doesn't necessarily have, you know, the words for it, or kind of they don't know how to convey what's going on. And I think comic books, like everyone has kind of said here, like you're able to kind of follow the story through the pictures, but for the kids that are able to obviously like read and are at that kind of comprehension, they go into a lot of stuff that can be super helpful in, you know, learning more about themselves and just figuring out what's going on with them. And they get a good story too. And I really love like the science comics books too. You know, like we were talking about how, I think Laura, you mentioned you read kids comics too, even if it's just for you. And so do I. Like I love reading kids comics, and the science comics ones are like so fun. You know, there's so many kinds of books out there, and comics just like, you know, it's just a medium. There's different genres and a bajillion different things for anyone to enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's kind of like along the lines of what I would say is that there's a comic for everyone. There's, you know, a story for everyone in this medium, and that's part of the beauty of it. And then I think the only thing I would add is kind of along the lines of some of the things that were said earlier by a few people, is just like, you know, let them pick out what they like. Like, I know that sometimes there's kind of this urge to be like, is this educational? Like they need to read something with a good message, or like this positive component, or like whatever that is. And I think that just kind of turns it into like homework. Like I remember when I was a kid, my mom was very anti-Barbie. She would, which, you know, then I wrote Barbie comics, hilarious. But she would not let me get a Barbie. And that made me want Barbie even more. It just like stoked this like deep desire that I had to have a Barbie doll. I don't know if I even wanted the Barbie, or if it was just like this sort of like rebellion because I was told I couldn't have it. So I think like sometimes there is this sort of knee-jerk response of like, is this educational? Is it positive? Is it sort of all of these things? And a lot of times the stories are just stories, you know, and whatever that kid is attracted to, whatever is going to get them reading and looking at stories and kind of like consuming these different things is a good thing, whether that's like a Barbie comic or something super educational or whatever it is. But I think like a lot of times I do see that what was mentioned earlier about the dad with the, you know, the Silver Age Daredevil comics, where it's like, well, I love this, so you should love it too. that I think like letting the kids kind of pick out what they want is also like an expression of their personality as it's developing. And then maybe later they can move on to, Silver Age Daredevil or whatever you're interested in. But because there is so much variety, because there is a comic book for everyone, I think just letting them kind of guide that and picking out what they want to read makes the kid more excited about it.
Yeah, and I think too, like Stephanie was saying about Guts by Raina, there's so many kids comic books out there these days that address issues that weren't around when we were young, and they can help a lot. Like Diana and the Amazons, there's like a scene where she wants to play with her mom, but her mom's busy. And I feel like I've used that several times, like during quarantine, like we read that book and then it's like, see, she was busy, but it's not because she doesn't love her, and then because they can see the pictures, it's much easier for them to sort of like understand the emotions behind it, because, Maggie, like you were saying, like it's easier for them to connect with them because even if they can't read, they can understand the visual cues on the people's faces. And I think comics is a great, like, even kids who are too little to read can really get something out of a comic on their own because, of the joy in people's faces, or you can tell that people are happy or that they're friends, and they can kind of make up their own stories even if they can't read, because you can really see that in the pictures.
That's so important, I think, giving kids, Stephanie mentioned this, giving kids the ability to put their feelings into words is such a huge capability of kids' stories in general and kids' comics specifically, because like you said, they can look at the pictures and they can see how the kids are feeling. I think that's really, really important. It's something we talk about a lot when we're developing Lumberjane stories, is what is the feeling that we're trying to give kids words for? Because like you were modeling with your own kids, like once you are able to name a feeling and a situation, then you have control over it. But until then, you're not able to process what's going on because you don't have the words. And giving kids those words is such a precious gift to be able to provide.
So nice. Yeah, I mean, I just love comics. I mean, anyone who knows me knows that. But I think there's just so much you can do with comics, and I think people often discount kids' comics, but I think even as an adult who reads them, to myself, you can get so much out of them. And what would you tell the kids in your life, or those who aren't in your life, how to get through a time like this, and is there comics that can help?
Yeah, I think that like comics, one of the great things about them is that you really can do so much. Like in my comic, how it's a big fantasy world, but also like in Raina's comics, which are so grounded, and they still can like communicate so much more, I think, than other mediums, because yeah, like we said before, there's the picture that goes along with it. So I feel like a comic now can actually explore a lot of different things. Like you could escape, like you could go to a different place entirely with a fantasy world, which is cool. And then it could also help you like understand maybe like what you're feeling right now, because yeah, it's a really complicated time. And I don't think any of us really know like exactly how to get through it, but comics have been helping me get through it. So hopefully, like I hope that kids can also look at comics, maybe draw their own comics too. Like maybe, like I started drawing comics when I was in the 7th grade. So, I think that like if you can just kind of explore your own feelings with drawings and words, like that's a really good way for you to just kind of work some stuff out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, stories are always important. I feel like stories are a big part of what's getting me through this time, both writing and consuming them. And, I know as a kid, I guess actually as an adult as well, I was very obsessive about things that I love. So if I had like one of Raina's comics or, Victoria's Wonder Woman or something like that as a child, I feel like I would become so obsessed with it that I would read it over and over and over again. And it wouldn't, I wouldn't even need something new. It would just be sort of like, a daily comfort that kind of gets you through. So I think that's just part of like the beauty of stories, and hopefully that's something that can help everyone, imagine either an escape or a better future, or, show them maybe something that they can do now as far as like activism or whatever it is. But yeah, I think that it just speaks to how important stories are, and how a lot of times that's what gets us through. And you know, it's also, I also love the idea of like kids like kind of taking inspiration from that and drawing their own comics. I know that that's something that, you know, me and my brother did when we were little, is just like come up with these ideas, or like go up, like the one that we drew that I discovered when I went back to my family home last year, was apparently something that we were obsessed with when we were little. It was like two things. It was Star Trek and Lamb Chop, you know, the puppet, the little puppet Lamb Chop. So we drew this whole series of comics, and drew and wrote this whole series of comics called Lamb Trek, which was like Star Trek, but all the characters were lamb chops, and they all had names, like it was all the Star Trek characters' names, but they all started with L. And just looking at that, I was like, wow, kids, like they don't have that sort of like censor that a lot of us develop, where we're like, maybe this is not a good idea that I should put on paper. They just kind of let that creativity run wild, whether it makes sense or not. So I've loved also getting, you know, like little fan art from kids of like Cassandra, like in her Batgirl outfit. And like, I love the idea of that being kind of like a torch that is passed to, like, you know, I wrote my story about Cassandra, and now you could write yours. And that can kind of be part of the comfort of the story. That can be part of what gets you through, is like imagining what might be next for her.
Yeah, I think like everybody's kind of touched on exactly what I would kind of say too. You know, I grew up in the middle of nowhere. Like my parents weren't around a ton. And so my best friends were books. Like I spent hours at the library, and I just like would take books out all the time, and I would read at home, and I just got completely enveloped in those worlds. And, you know, that got me through that. Like just, I remember making stories for myself. I'm also an only child. And I remember just like telling myself stories out loud that, you know, like, so I had other worlds, and it was like I had other people around. And I think, you know, obviously now everybody's kind of isolated and everybody's just at home, and books are great. I love reading prose. But comics just have this added layer, right? Because again, we've all touched on this numerous times, where there's that visual component. And sometimes if you're too tired to read or whatever, you can just look at the pictures, you can absorb. And, you know, as a kid, like Sarah said, like everyone I think has kind of brought up, you know, there's the component where you can just draw and put down your own thoughts on paper. You know, like, do you want to journal, but you don't want to write it down? Like, draw your feelings, draw your day. There's so many ways that comics, you know, can really just help us process our feelings and process what we're going through today and in the world. And yeah, I don't entirely know where I was going with that entire thought here, but like, I just think there's, you know, comics, there's so many other avenues you can explore too. I remember I was at a con last year, I don't know what's time, and I remember this kid who just told me, he was like, yeah, like my friend, he draws the comics and like I color them, you know, like I just like to color them. And I was like, you know, that's like a job in comics. And he was like, what? Like his mind was blown. Like he was just like, he didn't know that was a thing. Like he thought it was like being told like this hot thing that he just like doing for his friend. And I think there's like a lot of things to explore in comics besides just obviously like writing and drawing. And obviously that's a bit like early to kind of be like, well, would you like to be a colorist? Would you like to narrow it down? But, you know, there's
really
just
letterers right now if you want to start early.
yeah, practice. But, you know, there's just like a lot of different ways that you can get involved in comics and enjoy comics if you kind of, you know, let kids explore that, and they can really save the day.
I'm going to teach all of my young students how to flat, and then I'm just going all of that. That's my least favorite thing to do.
So important for a kid to learn.
Yeah.
You'll be responsible for the next generation of flatters.
Let me tell you about the most exciting job for cartoons. But when I talk with my students about, you know, everything that's going on, I try and tell them that everyone, including their parents, including the grown-ups that they know, everyone's just trying their best. And even though like everything's kind of terrible right now, and you don't have to pretend that it's not. And I think that's something that's really important for kids now, is that like if you're having a hard day or if you're having a hard time, like you can be upset about it. You can be sad, and it's more helpful to like let yourself feel sad. Maybe read a sad comic or something like that, like really lean into it. Because I think that and this is also, you know, for me and things that I tell myself too, is that, you know, nobody really knows what this looks like and how to really react to this, because it's not something that we've had to experience before. It's not something that we can base off of. It's not like, oh yeah, remember like back in 98 when everybody was in quarantine for 5 years. I remember I knitted so many scarves back then or whatever. So just like reminding kids that everybody, like them and their grown-ups, are all just trying to figure it out like one day at a time, and you don't always have to have the answers, and you don't always have to like, I think especially with kids, like I always have them do like a check-in at the beginning of our Zoom classes, like, you know, thumbs up if it's going well, thumbs in the middle if it's not so great, and a thumbs down. I think it's important to like, you know, check in, and if you're having a bad day, it's fine to have a bad day, because if you're having nothing but good days, like tell me what drug you're on, because I need it.
You sound like the best teacher.
I know. I was just thinking
Like,
that.
Oh, that's really sweet.
I'm sorry, I like interrupted you because I was just like, my life would have been changed if I had a teacher like you.
Yeah, but I mean, it's teaching comics, and like we all love comics. I personally think that comics are like the epitome of art. Like I think it's the best thing that's ever happened, because you've got story, you've got visual, you've got the design of things on a page. I mean, you can say that I'm a good teacher, but it's like teaching about the coolest thing ever. And I still haven't swore in front of my students yet, so that's 5 years.
So we're running out of time, so I think a good way to kind of wrap it up might be if everyone says their book, and then maybe if everyone has an example of a book they've read lately or that they recommend to kids. I just read, I'm looking over at the title, The Deep and Dark Blue, which was such a great book.
So good.
And one I would recommend. So yeah, everyone's gonna run and grab books.
Yeah, I've got mine. I'm Meggie Ramm, and I teach kids comics, and I've got a comic called Batcat coming out. And this is also from a Lumberjanes creator. This has been a book that I've referenced so much and that I've reread during quarantine. I love Snapdragon by Kat Lay, I think is her last name. This is such a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful comic, and it's great, and it's really cute, and it's witchy. So if you're looking for something that's like a little bit spooky to get your kids, you should definitely get this one.
I'm Victoria Ying. My book is City of Secrets. It is a big epic adventure. And the book I want to recommend is Vera Brosgol's Anya's Ghost. It's a little older, but it's very spooky, but still very kid-friendly. And yeah, it's one of my favorites.
Sarah?
Yeah, I am Sarah Kuhn. I wrote Shadow of the Batgirl and The Riverdale Diaries, Volume 1. And a book that a graphic novel I would recommend is Mooncakes by Wendy Xu and Suzanne Walker. It's very like magical and sweet and wholesome and has lovely romance and kind of intergenerational family dynamics, and it was just like it's like the perfect read if you want to feel like you're getting a hug.
Stephanie?
Yeah, so I went and grabbed my book. So this is Paranorthern. It's technically out second, not first. I don't have copies of Oh My Gods. Oh My Gods is out in January. Paranorthern is out in July. And book I'd recommend is kind of along the lines of Anya's Ghost, I think. Nightlights by Lorena Alvarez.
Oh, so good.
So good. It's just beautiful. Like the story is, I think, very similar along the lines of like Anya's Ghost, but like the panels and just the pages, the colors are stunning. It is just beautiful to look at and read. I love it.
Lilah?
I have 3 Lumberjanes books, Lumberjanes, The Infernal Compass, Lumberjanes, The Shape of Friendship, and the new one is Lumberjanes, True Colors. And a book that I would recommend is, I gave away my copy to someone, but The Prince and the Dressmaker by Jen Wang.
Mhm.
I think, oh no, I don't have that one on my desk. That one's usually on my desk.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Victoria.
Oh, Victoria's gonna.
She's got it.
Oh, there it is.
That's a very good one.
Got like all these little tabs in it because I love it so much.
Yeah, I heard her talk about that book, and it was so interesting. Like hearing her talk about all the how she designed all the costumes, and anyway. So thank you again for joining us. I really appreciate it. And kids comics are good for everyone, whether you've got kids in your life or you just want a nice book to read. I think everyone could use a nice book hug, and I think that's a great way. So thank you for joining us.